You're not seeing the first cranial nerve here, the olfactory nerve. You are just seeing the olfactory bulb, which is a synaptic point for those nerves, and the olfactory tract, which comes back to the cerebral cortex in this area in relationship to this next large nerve back behind it, which is kind of crossed over, somewhat chiasmatic, crossed over into a left and right side, which kind of merge in the middle, called the optic. Now, what's interesting about the olfactory nerve is that olfactory nerve fibers enter the bulb, come down the track, and go directly to the cerebral cortex, okay? We are said to be, we don't use our sense of smell as well as other vertebrate organisms. We don't, first of all, for example, a dog's nasal receptive surface is 120 times ours. Okay, so they've got a large sensory surface. Even cats are larger than ours. Okay, so they have a large receptive surface that they use for the sense of smell to help them relate to their environment, to relate to their external environment. Okay, and then this nerve comes directly back to the cerebral cortex. All other sensations in the body first have to go through an area we refer to as just below the cerebral cortex telencephalon, the cerebral cortex itself, called the diencephalon, where an aggregation of neurons lies in a region called the thalamus. All other sensations first go to the thalamus before they go to the cerebral cortex. Sense of smell goes directly back to the cerebral cortex. So we can say that it's not important, but the design of the nervous system has said to us that if it's not important, why is this the only sensation that comes back to the cerebral cortex? All other sensations first have to go to the thalamus. Okay. Then we have this crossed entity here, this second cranial nerve called the optic. That's your visual sensation, and the optic crosses, we'll talk about that a little bit when we get to the orbit. The optic crosses just behind the olfactory nerves alongside of it, and a crossover point is called a chiasm, or chiasmatic type relationship. So one half of the optic nerve actually takes care of the side of your retina closer to your nose, and one side takes care of the retinal surface that is closer to the lateral side of your head, so nasal and temporal. Okay? And so the nasal fibers actually cross over from the retina to the opposite side. So the optic nerves cross over at this chiasm, this crossover point, and then into this large extension that also goes back, in this case, goes back to the thalamus, okay, but not the brainstem. And that's called the optic tracts. Okay, that's the optic tracts. We'll actually look at the brain. A lot of these, depending upon the specimen that we get, we can see a lot of them. So the optic tracts bring the sensation back now to the thalamus, but not to the brainstem. The olfactory nerve did not bring that sensation directly back to the brainstem and brought it to the olfactory bulb, and the olfactory tract took it to the cerebral cortex, once again, not the brainstem. In today's neuroscience, we might not consider cranial nerve 1, the olfactory, and cranial nerve 2, the optic, a true cranial nerve because they do not come directly back to the brainstem. And it's believed to be a true cranial nerve in all aspects of it. It should have some type of relationship to nuclear groups inside of the brainstem. Okay. So these are the first two nerves. Then behind them, we have a bulbous region, and here on each side kind of flares out. It has arms that engage another nervous system structure called the cerebellum, and that's called the pons. And then in front of the pons, there are two large branches, and they are alongside two little bulges between them that look like little tiny breasts from the neuroanatomists, so they call them mammillary bodies. They're actually hypothalamic nuclei. We'll talk about that, those in neuro. But on each side of that is a cranial nerve coming off really of an area just in front of the pons called the midbrain, and that's the third cranial nerve, or the oculomotor nerve. Okay? The oculomotor nerve. What do you think that innervates? We talked about that actually. What does that innervate?
Muscles of the eye.
Okay, extrinsic muscles of the eye. Anything else? Some intrinsic muscles of the eye as well. Okay. So that's the oculomotor nerve, third cranial nerve. And then there's kind of, if you look there on your left where it says trochlear nerve, that little arrow, it's this really thin nerve fiber. And that thin nerve fiber is not really coming off the lateral or the anterior portion of the brainstem. It actually is the only cranial nerve that comes off the posterior aspect of the brainstem, and that's the trochlear. Okay, the fourth cranial nerve. What does that innervate? What extraocular muscle goes through a pulley? Superior oblique. So a pulley, anatomically named, is a trochlea. So this is the nerve that innervates the muscle that goes through the pulley, goes through the trochlear nerve. Okay. Then there's this very large nerve I showed you last week that has two parts. It has a thin twig, and it has a very thick portion, and it's coming off really the posterior lateral aspect of the pons, and that's your fifth cranial nerve. That's your trigeminal. Okay. So what type of things are associated with the thin twig? Is that motor or sensory? Motor or sensory? Okay, Stella, you lipped it. Say it. Motor. Okay? So that's the motor branch coming from the brainstem, going to muscles of mastication, going to the anterior digastric, going to the tensor palatini muscle, those going to all the muscles of mastication. Okay? Then that large branch is the sensory aspect. Okay? Trigeminal has the largest sensory input of any cranial nerve. The largest cranial input, or nervous system input in terms of sensation. Okay. Then we go back here to this area, and there's actually two nerves here, a thin nerve and a thick nerve, okay? The thick nerve is the facial nerve proper, so to speak. And what is that innervate? Facial nerve proper. I know that's a long time. Muscles of facial expression. Okay. This thin branch is interesting in that it has a name, some people call it the intermediate nerve. It was described by a guy named Risberg, W-R-I-S-B-E-R-G. So sometimes it's called the nerve of Risberg. And that in it contains things associated with visceral sensory activity and general visceral efferent activity. So both autonomic, but also taste sensation. Okay, special visceral afferent. So that's the facial nerve, that corner between the back of the pons and this dilation here, this constriction, that's the medulla. It's called the pontomedullary angle. Okay. And then we come down to a very large nerve. It's actually larger than the facial nerve, which is cranial nerve number 8 over here. That's the vestibulocochlear. Vestibular function is balance and equilibrium. Cochlear function is learn. Did anybody set that for you? All right, so that eighth cranial nerve is both equilibrium or vestibular function and balance. That's the best term. Other names that are used for it are auditory or acoustic or statoacoustic in relationship to posture and hearing, okay? That's the eighth cranial nerve, okay? So, are there any motor fibers in that? Okay. No. Strictly it's special sensory. Okay. And then we get down here to some nerves. This is the glossopharyngeal, and all of these fibers in here. This is the vagus nerve, so cranial nerve 9, cranial nerve 10. Okay, cranial nerve 9. Okay, glossopharyngeal. Glossopharyngeal. What does that say to you? What is this nerve associated with? Okay, the tongue and the pharynx, right? And once again, anatomy's not rocket science. Okay, so the glossopharyngeal also is a GVE type of entity. It has innervation that goes to mucosal glands in the pharynx, although you don't see this, interestingly enough, in anatomy text, but you do see it. You do see it in the neurotext. That's why I don't understand the dichotomy there at this point in time, but it's kind of confusing at first. But the glossopharyngeal nerve is also a nerve that is a combination of sensations. In the posterior 1/3 of the tongue, it receives information in regards to general sensation, touch, pressure, pain, temperature, okay, but also taste sensation, special visceral afferent taste sensation. And it also, because of the mucosa there, it typically is believed to have a GVE type of output, okay? Secretomotor output to the back of your tongue, okay? The vagus nerve, what does the vagus nerve do? About any darn thing that you can think of, okay? Including taste sensation for the area behind what's called the root of the tongue. General sensation there innervates a lot of the posterior pharyngeal muscle, skeletal muscles there, which are now coming from branchial arch 4 and branchial arch 6, okay? And it also has a large GVE output all throughout the body. Smooth muscle, some of the glandular structures in the larynx, smooth muscle, so the glands of the larynx, esophagus on down, all the way to the beginning of the descending colon, okay? Taste sensation from this root of the tongue area, and general sensation. Although it's interesting, glossopharyngeal and the vagus nerve, they send their fibers, their central fibers, to a nucleus associated with the trigeminal nerve called the spinal nucleus. We'll talk more about that in neuro, okay? To the spinal nucleus, okay? So vagus nerve has a huge representation. We're going to be breaking this down into component parts in just a second, okay? All right, so then we have this nerve. This is the medulla. Once we're past the medulla, this is spinal cord, okay? So we actually have just below here, this is actually the first spinal nerve. This is C1, okay? But we see this large twig coming up on each side, and it is receiving information from, or sending information from as low down as C5 or C6. And then it's sending that information into the cranial vault because it enters the cranial vault through the foramen magnum, which is the same place where the spinal cord meets the brainstem. So after it does that, it's going to have to lead through where? Where is this nerve going to lead? This is the 11th cranial nerve or the spinal accessory? How does it leave the cranial vault, the skull, inside of the skull? How does the spinal accessory nerve leave the skull? Through what opening?
Is it not the foramen magnum?
What's that?
Is it not the foramen magnum?
It enters through the foramen. So yes, it is not the foramen. How does it leave the skull? I gave you that long list. You better have that memorized by the end of the course. Okay? Jugular foramen. What else goes through the jugular foramen?
Jugular vein?
Well, it leaves, that's true. Anything else, Brian? Couple of cranial nerves. Which two cranial nerves precede this? Cranial
Vagus.
nerve. Vagus. And what's before the vagus? Glossopharyngeal. Okay? Glossopharyngeal. Leave the skull through the jugular foramen. But first, the spinal accessory has to enter. Now, this is also a nerve that in today's neuroscience is still somewhat of a quandary, because they are not sure that it has a brainstem aspect to it. You know, and this is a really tough thing to find out, because this is a hard area to look at, both anatomically as well as physiologically. So this is another nerve that is questionably a true cranial nerve. So cranial nerve 1, cranial nerve 2, and cranial nerve 11 possibly in today's neuroscience would not be considered true cranial nerves. So we wouldn't have 12 pairs, we would only have 9. Okay? All right, so that's the spinal accessory. Enters through the foramen magnum, comes from as low down as C5 or 6, and goes up. Okay? Why is it called spinal accessory? Well, spinal because it comes from spinal nerves. It's supposed to be accessory to the vagus nerve, but there's a lot of discussion about how. Some people think it assists in innervating skeletal muscle in the pharynx. Okay? Some people think it is associated with sensory feedback from the larynx, because it is believed to arise from branchial arch number 6. Now, you will probably not see that in any textbook that is talking about the distribution or development of structures from branchial arch number 6, because nobody's got the courage to make a statement. Okay? But spinal accessory nerve is an interesting nerve in its own right, if it is a cranial nerve. All right, so here we see this on this schematic. This nerve in the middle, here coming off now, this was the pontomedullary angle, this is the medulla, this is the pons. Between the medulla and the pons is a long cranial nerve that comes off. It is the 6th cranial nerve. Where does it go? What does it do, the 6th cranial nerve? What's its name? Abducen. Okay. What does the abducen do? Lateral rectus. Innervates the lateral rectus. Okay. Here's just, this is a book. I guess you're on your own these days in relationship to whether or not you use the electronic editions or whether you use the written editions of texts. The reason they took that out is that Vital Books charged us $1,000 per year per student. So essentially, you were unbeknownst to you with your matriculation fees, you were buying every textbook that was assigned. So we decided they wouldn't do it any different way. They'd give us some handle on that, but students felt it would be better if they had the choice. Now, I don't know what your choice is, but I'm suggesting strongly that you get some textbook for this course. And the one I recommend the most is this Anatomy for Dental Medicine, edited by Eric Baker, this team because I think it's probably the most complete book that you have. But I also recommend you getting McLean's Photographic Atlas, because you're gonna need something that helps you through the lab. Okay? Usually students don't struggle too much with the didactic stuff, they struggle with the lab. Okay, so this is just a representative and a book that's called Fundamentals of Neuroscience for Basic and Clinical Application. This was just out of the 3rd edition, it's now in its 5th edition. The author here is Dwayne Haynes. This textbook is one of the primary textbooks used in neuroscience and medical development education. So if you want to get it, it's a good book, and we'll refer to that information in it in neuro next year, first semester. Okay, these cranial nerves are either coming to or going to the brainstem or to the brain itself. Okay, so this is, the brain's been removed here, and we're looking at the floor of the cranium, of the cranial vault. And we see these nerves, we looked at this image before, going through these openings, either coming into the brainstem or going out from the brainstem. Okay? So this is the path that they take. Okay? This nerve here is cranial nerve number 11. I didn't mention the nerve right here in the front of the foramen magnum going through these openings above the occipital condyles. That's cranial nerve number 12. The hypoglossal is the hypoglossal nerve. The hypoglossal innervates all of the skeletal muscle of the tongue. Where does the skeletal muscle of the tongue come from?
The second brachial arch?
Doesn't come from any brachial arch, it comes from somas. Okay? It comes from somas. Glad you remembered. Okay. All right. When we talk about nerve trunks, you know, that's like a nerve that you can see that has maybe hundreds, maybe even thousands of fibers carried in it, okay? It is a mixture of different types of either sensory or motor modalities or both, okay? The modality is like general sensation, special sensation, okay? A motor entity is like visceral motor, somatic motor, or visceral motor associated with branchial arch developing muscles, okay? So these are different aspects of a nerve trunk. So I'm gonna do this, write this out, okay? But these guys, this is not my fault. This happened well before me. I had as much trouble with it initially as you probably are having right now. From these two guys, Alf Brodal, which was the premier neurologist, neuroanatomist of his time, and one of his colleagues, C. Judson here, and they wrote this treatise on cranial nerves back in the 1930s, a long time. Okay? So they looked at comparative vertebrate anatomy, they looked at the embryologic development, so they had to look at a lot of specimens, they had to create a lot of specimens to look at that were kind of analogous to humans as far as being mammals, okay? And they came up with a system to describe from a functional perspective where these nerve components were coming from, okay? Okay, so here is the early development of the nervous system. We're looking down through the amnion. The amnion is a chamber above the developing embryonic disc. What you're looking at is an embryonic disc. And somewhere around the 18 days, so about 2.5 weeks, okay, there comes a lot of activity on the surface ectoderm. This is the ectodermal side of the embryo. And it becomes very active, and you can actually see, if you're looking at an embryo, that it's still in vivo. You can see the activity happening on the surface, and this is called a primitive strain. And then that happens down the middle this is the back side. This shape, by the way, is where they came up with the term egg. Okay, kind of a tapered egg. And in the front of it is a bump called the primitive node, or another name for it is Henson's node. And at that point, we get a proliferation of the surface from outside the embryo, from this ectodermal layer, to inside the embryo. Okay, and here we see a cross-section through that region. We'll talk about what the differentiation between the blue area and the gray area is. You see a proliferation of the surface ectoderm inside of the embryo to form a structure referred to as the notochord. So if we look at this from now a portion transversely, here we see, so from 18 days, so to speak, to onward, we see at this point we're also starting to get somites along the long axis, those little bulges coming out along the long axis associated with the trunk. But what's happening here is that the notochord has taken its place here, that sort of reddish colored dot, and then behind it is the surface ectoderm as it's starting to invaginate inside of the embryo, okay? And as it does that, it's going to have this dark blue area that's going to wind up with one type of cell population, and this lighter blue area that's shown that's going to come in with a different type of cell population, okay? And these two populations here, the dark blue is going to develop eventually a tubular entity here, and the light blue is going to develop a crestal tissue here. But they are both behind the notochord. What is one of the characteristics of a mammal in relationship to its nervous system? What from an anatomical position does the nervous system take?
I don't understand the question.
It's posterior to, or dorsal to, the notochord. So
Okay,
this is where the term a dorsal tubular nervous system comes from. The nervous system now has a tubular entity that's behind the notochord, and this is in mammalian development what you see in every mammalian form, a dorsal tubular nervous system. However, not all of the cells are here. Some of them are here. They're not in the central, they're not in this tubular nervous system, they're behind it, okay? So it's like a crest of neurons behind the tube. So what would you call it? You wouldn't call it tubular or dorsal tubular, you would call it neural crest. So this now, neural crest, is adjacent to the central nervous system, to the tubular nervous system, but it's not within it. It's peripheral to it. So as this comes about and develops into this central ring-like area of this tube, and this comes in behind it, we eventually come in with this central nervous system aggregation of cells in this tube, and a peripheral aggregation of cells that are out adjacent or peripheral to the tube. So that's the peripheral nervous system and the central nervous system. Okay. Now, the neuron populations that are going to be in the tube are of what type? Are they nuclear or are they ganglion? They're nuclear, right? They're nuclear, okay? So all of the cell populations that are in here are nuclei of some sort, either a motor nucleus sending information out from the central nervous system, or a sensory nucleus receiving information from the periphery. Okay? These cell populations out here are going to give rise to cells that are peripheral or adjacent to the central nervous system. So what would you call those aggregations of cells? Ganglia. Okay. So this is where the concept of central nervous system and peripheral nervous system comes from. Either from the central neural tube is central nervous system neurons, or adjacent to it is peripheral nervous system neurons. Okay. Now, that's kind of just the beginning. Each one of these entities has a specific type of activity, either sensory or motor, associated with it. Let's see this next slide. Next, okay. So there are then in the brainstem and in the spinal cord, there is a differentiation into whether these neurons are of a modality that is sensory or a modality that is motor. And so there are actually two plates of cells that create this. One is wing-like plates that are in the back of the spinal cord or brain stem, that a wing-like structure is referred to as an alar. This alar plate is a wing-like plate of cells. You've all seen images of a spinal cord at this point, either schematically or directly from some biology course that you took or something that I showed you last semester, okay? So the alar cells are separated from the basilar plate cells by a groove in the side of the spinal cord, an indentation in the side of the spinal cord of the brainstem that lies between this alar plate of cells and this basilar plate of cells. Now, what are you seeing here in relationship to these two plates of cells? The alar plates are all afferent, so what kind of cells are they? Sensory. The basilar plate cells are all efferent, so they're all what? Motor. Okay. So what has happened here is that the nervous system has set itself out in terms of these nuclei inside of the brainstem or spinal cord. So where all sensory cells lie most posterior in position to the cells that are in front of them, which are motor cells. So alar plate gives rise to all of the sensory neuron populations in the central nervous system, and the basilar plate, all motor cells that are leaving the central nervous system, okay? And they are separated by a groove on the side of the brainstem or spinal cord that's called the limiting sulcus, or the sulcus limitans. So the alar plate is separated from the basilar plate cells by the sulcus limitans, either in the brainstem or in the spinal cord. Okay, and this is just showing. You see here the artist. This textbook is 1966. Okay, I know you don't like the idea that I use images from old textbooks that are older than your parents. Okay. Hashowever, some of them have, I feel, images that demonstrate what I'm trying to say. Okay.
It's still the same.
Yeah.
It's not,
Hasn't changed, right?
evolution doesn't move that quick.
So we've got over here on the upper left, we've got really a spinal cord section with the developing central canal in the center, and you can see there's a little groove on the inside of that. That's the sulcus limitans. And all the cells that are developing behind the sulcus limitans are alar plate or sensory. All of the cells that are designated in red in front of the sulcus limitans are motor cells. Now, then we go alongside, and what they're showing is on the left is the spinal cord, on the right is the brainstem. Yes?
Okay, so Does the alar lamina eventually become like dorsal root, or it's not that way? And the base
It's
becomes
dorsal.
ventral?
It's dorsal or posterior.
Okay, so
And
that's, eventually that's.
right,
where
and the
they-
basilar plate is ventral or anterior.
Okay, so that sulcus limitans becomes essentially the spinal cord, and then you've got dorsal-ventral roots.
No, they are, all of the cells are in the spinal cord. Sulcus limitans is separating two aggregations of cells, one behind it in the gray matter and one in front of it in the gray matter. So both the black and the red are cells in the spinal cord.
So what's found in the center of the sulcus
In the spinal cord, the spinal canal over here in the
Okay.
brainstem, that's the fourth ventral.
then? I understand.
That's the fourth ventral. And as they develop in relationship to cranial nerves, they develop also with this sulcus limitans here between where we differentiate, once again, cells that are colored black, which are sensory or alar plate cells, and cells that are colored red, which are basilar plate cells or are anterior cell populations. Okay. All right, so there's a lot of terminology that goes along with this, and I'm gonna write it out. Okay, so here it is in this, this brainstem aspect. So let's go over here to the document. Okay. Maybe. Okay, so we have cells of the central nervous system or within it in this case the brainstem, and as a group, what kind of cells are these? Are these ganglionic or are they nuclear? Okay, so the name given to them are CNS nuclei, or in some cases they use the term a central connection. Central connection, okay? These are all the cells that are in the central nervous system, motor and sensory, okay? We can developmentally all sensory neurons of the brainstem or spinal cord gray matter arise from a plate of cells called the alar plate. All motoneurons of the brainstem or spinal cord
Bless you.
arise from gray matter of the basilar plate. A separation between the anterior portion of the brainstem and spinal cord, okay, and the posterior portion of these nuclei in the brainstem or spinal cord is this structure here referred to as a sulcus limitans. Sulcus limitans separates cells of the alar plate from cells of the basilar plate. Alar plate cells are all sensory. Basilar plate cells are all motor, okay? Okay? In this case, we're talking about nuclei. These entities are within the confines of the spinal cord gray matter or the brainstem gray matter, okay? So, from these entities or to these entities, we have specific nuclei for specific types of what we refer to as a sensory modality, a sensory type, or a motor modality, a motor type. Sensory information is coming from the periphery to the CNS, central nervous system, okay, brain stem cells or spinal cord cells. Motor information is coming from the central nervous system and going to the periphery. These are effector organs, organs that are stimulated to do something based upon the motor input to them, okay? This could be skeletal muscle, this could be smooth muscle, glandular smooth muscle, cardiac muscle. Yes, Brian?
For those cranial nerves that have a both sensory and a motor component, are they comprised of basilar and alar tissue at the
Yes.
beginning? Okay. So
But
that's,
those are the rami, those are the spinal, those are the nerves themselves. These right now, we're just talking about the cell bodies, okay, that are either receiving information from the outside or giving off motor information to the outside.
like what becomes the horns?
Right. The horns in the spinal cord
Okay.
or gray matter in the brainstem. Okay. All right. So a modality, a sensory or motor modality what I mean by that is type of nervous activity. Are referred to as nerve components. In total, sensory and motor, we have 7 different nerve components. There are, talk about sensory components. First, there's a sensory component referred to as special, somatic, efferent. or SSA. So what does that mean? What does that mean? What did I do?
You wrote ether.
Oh, that's stupid. Okay. You watch me all the time, don't you? Okay, afferent. Okay, so sensory. Afferent is output, as input, efferent is output, okay? Sensory is afferent, motor is efferent, okay? So special somatic afferent, okay? So these are entities, these are special entities. So first of all, they're only associated with what? They're special. Cranial nerves, okay? Now, in this case, we're referring to the soma as the body itself. As the body itself. This is information that is allowing the individual organism to relate itself to its external environment. So what are special sensations that allow us to consider our external environment? What are special sensations that allow us to do that?
Pressure, temperature?
That's not special.
Oh, sight,
Vision, hearing equilibrium. Yeah, but taste doesn't really help us as an organism to view anything unless we put it in our mouth, okay?
olfaction.
Olfactory, okay? So, nerves that have special somatic afferent are the cranial nerve number 2, the optic, cranial nerve number 8, okay, the vestibulocochlear, and I particularly throw, and a lot of others will throw smell in here in relationship to the olfactory. This is cranial nerve number 1, okay? So you see things in your environment, you react to them as an organism. You hear things in your environment, you react to them as an organism. You move through your environment in a balanced type of movement, otherwise you can't move through it effectively. Okay? And things that you smell will also cause you to react to your environment, your external environment. So these are special somatic afferent. They have information that allows you as an organism as a whole to relate to your environment, okay? So smell's a problem, because we'll see that it also is a special entity that most neuroscientists would not object to, special visceral afferent. We'll talk about what that is in a minute, okay? But why, okay? Because, first of all, science is kind of cruel in many ways, okay? And it's also rather biased, okay? So like early scientists, they determined your level of intelligence based upon the size of your brain. Okay? And you can have a very big brain, but nothing's going on in there. Okay? As opposed to somebody that has a small brain and is really a powerful structure. Okay? So early developers used to categorize, early neuroscientists used to categorize our ability as a species. They made quantitative judgments based on different cultures based upon the size of their brains, which was totally incorrect, but also very biased. Okay? So vision's easy, I think. You see it, you know, if there's a train coming towards you and you're standing in the middle of the railroad tracks, the smartest thing to do is move away from it, okay? Or a car, or a bus, or something like that if you see it, okay? Or if you see somebody you know and you want to see them, you can go towards that individual. Okay? Hearing, same thing. You hear things in your environment that you react to. I've got this golden retriever puppy. he hears things that I can't possibly hear, and he reacts to each and every one of those sounds. Sometimes without telling me. Okay? But he hears things, and he's then will stop and think about what is he hearing? Is it something that he knows what it is? I don't know if he knows the difference between a train and a car. But we do, okay? Or we hear, for example, if there was a gunshot outside this room right now, you might be concerned. And you might want to move out of this room someplace as far away from that sound as you possibly could. From the same standpoint, moving through your environment, if you can't move through your environment in a balanced fashion and carry this little heavy ball with you, you're going to fall flat on your face. Okay? So that's helping us in our environment. Now, where does smell come into play? Well, you know what? Smell is multifactorial. Also, it is a very commercial type of sensation, okay? Because you smell things, and some things smell good to you, okay? And some things don't smell good to you, or they kind of make you sick when you smell them. So if they smell good, you go over and sniff it. Unbeknownst to you, there's a bee in the flower, But it smells putrid, and you try and move as far away from it as possible, and you're definitely not going to put it in your mouth, probably, okay? But if you happen to be a deer, which, by the way, the deer now don't live in rural areas, they live in the suburbs. I don't know if you've noticed that, but if they're out in the forest and the forest is burning, they smell the smoke, and they're going to relate smoke as a negative sensation. They're going to try and get rid of it. From the same standpoint, they, in relationship to a concept of smell called pheromonal, if they sense a possible mate, they will try and move closer to that mate, or they sense somebody who is not a mate, but is an aggressor or their enemy, or somebody that's trying to kill them, they will move either towards them to fight or away from them to get out of that area, okay? So obviously, I say commercial, one of the biggest industries in the world is the perfume and cologne industry, okay? They're just trying to give you that perfect odor, okay? That you can carry with you wherever you want to. So, just like cosmetics, making you look more gender specific, smell is also something that can help you in your environment. So these are 3 cranial nerves that have SA type components, okay? So then we've got another component that is referred to as GSA, or, let me write this out, sorry, general somatic afferent, or GSA. Okay, so this is general sensation. So what are general sensations? Well, general sensations are touch, pressure, temperature, okay, vibratory sensation, okay, proprioception. These are general sensations. Now, what does that mean? That means that not only cranial nerves, but spinal nerves possess them. Okay. Cranial nerves that possess them are primarily cranial nerve 5, the trigeminal.
Can you move it up?
Yes. Cranial nerve 5, the trigeminal. But cranial nerve 9, glossopharyngeal.
Would that include taste?
No.
Or general?
No. Taste is special. Okay? So you can't, as I said to you, your toes can smell, but you can't smell these toes. Cranial nerve 10, the vagus. These all have at least receptors for pain sensation. Pain is an important sensation. It's called a noxious stimulus. It's a possible tissue destroying stimulus. Okay? But then other cranial nerves can have this proprioceptive impact. So cranial nerve 7 has proprioreceptors, facial. Cranial nerve 3, the ocular motor, it innervates skeletal muscles, has proprioceptive feedback. Trochlear, cranial nerve 4, and cranial nerve 6, the abducent. And then probably also cranial nerve number 11, spinal accessory. And cranial nerve number 12, the hypoglossal. If for no other reason they receive proprioceptive information from receptors associated with the structures they innervate. Okay? But primarily 5, 9, and 10 not only have proprioceptive type entities associated with skeletal muscle, but they also have pain receptors, pressure receptors, touch receptors. Okay? Then we have a sensation referred to as special visceral afferent, or SVA. So now it's special visceral afferent. What is special we know refers to these are entities that are associated with cranial nerves of the head, okay? Or receptors associated with those cranial nerves, okay? So, what, though, does visceral imply? That they're associated with what? Body cavity, tubular organs. Airway, GI tract, vascular system, okay? However, the vascular system we'll see is more general as opposed to being special. So what are receptors that are found within the visceral tubular entities? Where are the receptors for smell? Where are they? What's this thing called?
Olfactory bulbs?
They're in the olfactory neurons. Bulbs are only secondary. The neurons are in the mucosa of the olfactory cavity, okay? They're chemoreceptors. That's another thing that's important. Okay, they're chemoreceptors. Okay? So they receive information in relationship to the sense of smell. Okay? The nasal cavity is the beginning of what visceral-tubular system?
Respiratory tract?
Respiratory tract. Okay? So the olfactory, cranial nerve 1. Then we've got cranial nerves associated with what other sensation? What other types of receptors are in a visceral tubular entity?
Gestation? Gestation? Taste?
True, but are they special?
Is that not special?
It's not special.
I thought we said taste was special.
Taste is special.
Yeah, that's gestation.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm not thinking about the physiological.
Sorry,
definition.
taste,
No,
whatever, yeah.
I'm gonna put it down, gustation. Or gustatory. Okay, so, or taste. This is in the oral cavity, cranial nerve 7, anterior 2/3 of tongue, cranial nerve 9, posterior 1/3 of tongue, and cranial nerve 10, the root of the tongue. So facial, glossopharyngeal, and vagus. And The facial nerve also receives information from taste receptors in the soft palate. So these are special visceral, okay? So that's two, so far we've had two special and one general. Now there's a second general, and this is called general visceral afferent. So now these are not only found in association with cranial nerves, they're also found in association with spinal nerves as well. Okay? What are visceral sensations? Once again, we're talking about these tubular entities. So what would be something associated with the vascular bed? What would those receptors be detecting?
Baroreceptor?
Baroreceptors in relationship and chemoreceptors, picking up sensations associated with the pH of the blood, baroreceptors with stretch of the vessel. We have the stretch receptor in the gut tube. We have stretch receptors in the bronchioles, okay? We have stretch receptors in the aorta, okay, the aortic arch, okay? These baro and chemoreceptors have locations that are pretty much either in an area called the carotid sinus, where the common carotid branches into a external carotid and an internal carotid, or in the aortic arch, okay, among other places. So there's only two cranial nerves that have this, cranial nerve number 9, glossopharyngeal, and these are carotid bodies or chemoreceptors. And stretch receptors, which are called baroreceptors. As the vascular pressures change, they stretch the vessels. And also it's believed that the vagus nerve also has this. But where else? Vagus nerve has receptors associated with visceral sensations in all the gastrointestinal tubes all the way around to the junction of the transverse colon and the descending colon. So it has a huge distribution, not just vascular. But in terms of cranial nerves, these are the only two cranial nerves that have a general visceral entity associated with them. Spinal nerves throughout the body, we have spinal nerves that have general visceral associated with these visceral tubular areas down in the vascular bed. These blood vessels are traveling actually parallel to some of the spinal nerves, and also in relationship to certain thick, smooth muscle entities that are being stretched in relationship not only to the vascular bed, but also the visceral sensations as well, okay? All right, so now we go down here. This is the sulcus limitans. Okay, so everything back here is behind it. Okay? Now everything in front of it is what type of entity, what type of modality? Is it sensory or motor? Okay? So you've got general visceral sensations. They're really the closest to the sulcus limitans in the brainstem or in the spinal cord, okay? In posterior aspect to it. What do you think would be in front of it? Another general entity, but it's motor. So general, visceral, efferent. What is that synonymous with? Autonomic nervous system. What cranial nerves have a direct relationship or have direct nuclei which are associated with the autonomic nervous system? Cranial nerve 3, the oculomotor, which innervates the constrictor of the pupil, and it innervates the ciliary muscle that surrounds the lens, both used in the process of accommodation for near vision, okay? So cranial nerve number 3, the ocular motor, is the highest parasympathetic motor entity. Then we've got the facial, which comes next. What is the facial nerve? What's a parasympathetic autonomic activity of the facial nerve? What does it do? What does it innervate? Saliva or mucosal secretions. Okay. Secretomotor. Okay? So stimulation of these cells to release some type of mucus or salivary flow either into nasal mucosa. It stimulates the lacrimal gland to release tears. Okay? It stimulates the submandibular gland and the sublingual gland. Okay? To release saliva. Okay? So cranial nerve 7, cranial nerve 9, the glossopharyngeal. What does the glossopharyngeal nerve interfere in relationship to visceral motor activity? Very similar to the facial nerve, but one of the largest glands in our head. Carotid gland. Okay, that's also secretomotor, okay? But also mucosal glands of the pharynx. And then cranial nerve number 10. This is some type of mucosal entity somewhere in the body, all the way from the oral pharynx, the laryngeal pharynx, down into the esophageal mucosa, down into the bronchiolar mucosa, down into the area of the gut tube, vascular relationships to the cardiovascular system, the SA node. The SA node is actually a ganglion associated with the parasympathetic nervous system. So all 4 of these are the part of the parasympathetic autonomic nervous system. Do the sympathetics have any direct relationship to cranial nerves? No. What's the role of sympathetics? Other than in the eye, okay, where they innervate the dilator of the pupil. What is their primary role in the nervous system? Cause contraction of vascular smooth muscle. Where is the sympathetic nervous system cell bodies located? Is it located in the brainstem, or is it located in the spinal cord? From where to where? T1, or some people say C8, all the way down to L2 or L3. Those are the nuclei. Okay, then we have this other entity, which is only found in the head. So this is now special visceral efferent. Okay. Where are these nerves arise from, and the structures they innervate arise from? Oh, yes. Sorry. Where do they arise from? Where do these structures and these nerves arise from developmentally?
Brachial arches.
From branchial arches. This is what's referred to as branchiomeric skeletal muscle. So what cranial nerves innervate branchiomeric skeletal muscle? Okay. 5, the trigeminal. 7, the facial. Okay. 4 and 6, 3, 4, and 6 are actually they will see they're somatic. They're associated with somites, okay? Cranial nerve 9, cranial nerve 10, cranial nerve 11, these all arose from branchial arches. You'll see cranial nerve 12 also does not arise from branchial arches, it arises from somites. Okay? So special visceral efferent are cranial nerves that output the skeletal muscle that develop from gill arches, from branchial arches, pharyngeal arches, visceral arches. Okay? Then we have general, somatic, efferent. Okay, general, somatic, efferent. Now in this case, the term somatic is referring to muscle that came from somites, skeletal muscle that came from somites, not associated with the viscera. Okay, not associated with branchial arches. So there are two groups of somites that actually give rise to head structures that are not special, okay? They are general, they're somatotypic. One group is called, a group called pre-otic somites in front of the ear. They develop in front of the ear, which are cranial nerve 3, cranial nerve 4, cranial nerve 6. These are muscles associated with the extraocular apparatus, the globe of the eye, okay? And then we have a skeletal muscle group that arises from pre-occipital somites. Okay, we'll finish with this. And that, what's a pre-occipital somite? They are just below the developing head, so they are associated with which cranial nerve? That innervates skeletal muscle, cranial nerve 12. Okay. Okay? So we'll talk about some of this stuff again on the, not only here, but also in the laboratory. On this handout, I've got them listed according to the type of entity they're associated with. I've got them grouped that way, just like this, where I'm trying to group them. And I've got them in relationship, for example, whether they are afferent entities or efferent entities. So afferent entities are sensory, they're receiving sensations. Efferent entities are motor, they're sending out motor or efferent activity. Okay. All right, I will try, I actually am going to try and be in the lab on Saturday to go over stuff with the skull, okay? And we'll try and have other sessions where we do this. I'll try and tell my TAs to try and set up groups with you where they go over it as well. But from here on in, I will try and be in the lab on many Saturdays to go over stuff that we're talking about. You can see it in the lab. Next week, we're going to look for the first time at the head. Okay?